The German radio operator froze for a second. The voice coming through his headset didn't make sense. It was sharp, rushed, almost panicked. A fighter pilot was shouting that the American twin-engine aircraft they were chasing had suddenly slowed down, rolled hard, and was now coming back toward them. The pilot's last words cracked through the static. Dreht auf uns zu. He's turning back on us. In the blue sky over occupied Europe, something had gone very wrong. It was the morning of April 14, 1943, just after 10 a.m., over western Germany near the Ruhr industrial region. The air was clear, cold, and perfect for flying. American bombers were already on their way back to England after a deep strike. German fighter units were scrambling late, trying to catch whatever they could before the Americans crossed the coast. That's when 6 German fighters spotted a lone aircraft falling behind the formation. From a distance, it looked like an easy kill. The plane was a Lockheed P-38 Lightning, an unusual sight even by 1943 standards. Twin booms, twin engines, a long central cockpit. To German pilots used to single-engine fighters, it looked heavy, awkward and slow. They had a nickname for it, the fork-tailed devil. But that nickname had not yet earned its full meaning. Not yet. The P-38 belonged to the United States Army Air Forces, assigned to the 8th Air Force operating out of England. Its pilot was First Lieutenant Richard "Dick" Bong, a young American fighter pilot already gaining a quiet reputation among those who flew with him. He wasn't famous yet. He wasn't an ace in the newspapers. But he understood his aircraft better than most men in the sky. That morning, Bong had stayed with the bombers longer than planned. Fuel was running low. His squadron had already turned back. He was alone now, flying slightly lower, slightly slower, trying to stretch every minute of range out of his engines. That's when the warning lights flickered and his instincts tightened. Something wasn't right behind him. He glanced over his shoulder and saw them, dark shapes against the sun. 6 German fighters closing fast, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, and at least 1 Focke-Wulf FW-190. Experienced pilots, well armed, and they had numbers. To them, this was a textbook interception. 1 American, low on fuel, far from home. German ground controllers watched the dots converge on their radar scopes. The radio traffic was calm at first, confident, orders were short and clean. The American pilot was expected to dive, to run, or to break formation and try to escape west. That's what most Allied pilots did when outnumbered this badly. But the P-38 did none of that. Instead of diving away, Bong reduced throttle. The massive Allison engines pulled back. The aircraft slowed sharply. To the Germans behind him, it looked like panic. A mistake. A pilot who had misjudged his energy and was about to stall. The German leader ordered a tighter spread. They fanned out slightly, planning a clean pincer attack. 2 would come from above, 2 from behind, 2 from below. In seconds, the Lightning would be trapped in a killing box. Then the American did something no one expected. The P-38 suddenly rolled hard to the left, dropped 1 wing, and snapped into a tight turn that no aircraft its size was supposed to make. At the same moment, Bong pushed 1 engine forward and pulled the other back, using asymmetric thrust. The Lightning pivoted around its center like a door slamming shut. The first German fighter overshot instantly. At barely 300 meters, the American's nose came around faster than physics said it should. The concentrated firepower of the P-38 erupted. 4 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all mounted in the nose, fired as one. No convergence issues, no spread, just a solid stream of fire. The Messerschmitt caught the burst across its engine cowling. The aircraft snapped sideways, trailing smoke, and dropped out of formation. The German pilot didn't even have time to call it in. Now the radio traffic changed. Ground control heard raised voices. Confusion. A pilot shouting that the American had reversed direction too fast. Another warning that the Lightning wasn't running. It was fighting. Bong didn't chase the damaged fighter. He didn't need to. He climbed sharply instead, using the P-38's turbo-supercharged engines, which performed better at altitude than almost anything the Germans had. The remaining 5 fighters tried to follow, but they had already lost their shape. The second German pilot tried a head-on attack. It was a common tactic against American fighters, especially ones believed to be slow. He fired early. Too early. Bong held his fire, waited, and made a slight vertical adjustment. At less than 200 metres, he fired a 1-second burst. The German aircraft passed through the stream of bullets. The canopy shattered. The plane rolled inverted and disappeared into cloud. The radio operator on the ground heard a broken transmission, then nothing. Now the Germans understood something was wrong. This wasn't a scared bomber escort. This was a hunter. The remaining 4 fighters split up, each trying to attack from a different angle. One went high. One dropped low. 2 stayed wide, hoping to drag the American into a turn fight. That was exactly what Bong wanted. The P-38 was not a tight-turning dogfighter like a Spitfire, but it excelled in high-speed vertical manoeuvres. Bong used short climbs and sudden drops, never staying level long enough to be predicted. Each time a German pilot committed to an attack, the American changed the picture. One FW-190 dove in from above, confident in its firepower. Bong pulled up hard, forcing the German to overshoot again. As the Focke-Wulf crossed his nose, Bong fired another short burst. The rounds ripped through the wing root. The aircraft broke apart in mid-air. On the German radio frequency, someone shouted, "ist überall!" He's everywhere. Fuel warnings flashed again inside the P-38 cockpit. Bong knew time was against him. He couldn't afford a long fight. So he did something even more dangerous. He turned directly toward the last 3 fighters. The German pilots hesitated. Just for a second. And that second mattered. One broke right. One broke left. The third froze, unsure which way to go. Bong chose him. The Lightning surged forward. Guns fired. The German pilot bailed out almost immediately. His parachute opened low, just above the clouds. Now only 2 remained. They tried to disengage, tried to dive away east. But the P-38 had already climbed above them. Bong rolled inverted and came down like a hammer. One more burst. One more engine hit. Another German fighter spiraled toward the ground. The final pilot transmitted a panicked message to ground control. His voice was shaking. He reported that the American aircraft had turned back into the formation, destroyed multiple fighters, and was still maneuvering aggressively despite being alone. That transmission ended abruptly. When Bong finally turned west, the sky behind him was empty. Back at the German control center, officers stared at their boards. 6 fighters launched, none returned to formation. Reports were fragmented. Timings didn't make sense. An American aircraft had been classified as a single straggler. Instead, it had trapped and dismantled an entire interception group. Across the channel, Bong landed with almost dry tanks. Ground crew counted the holes in his aircraft. They listened quietly as he described the engagement in plain words, without excitement. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't boast. He just explained what he had done and why. Within weeks, German pilots would begin warning each other about the P-38 in their briefings. Not as a slow bomber escort, but as a dangerous opponent that could turn a pursuit into a trap. And the phrase "fork-tailed devil" would start appearing more often in German reports. Because this would not be the last time a P-38 turned back into the jaws of its hunters. By the summer of 1943, stories like this one were spreading quietly through Luftwaffe fighter units. They weren't printed in newspapers. They weren't announced in speeches. They moved pilot to pilot, whispered during briefings, and argued over in mess halls. The P-38 Lightning was no longer treated as a strange-looking American experiment. It was being studied. German intelligence officers noticed a pattern. When their fighters chased lone lightnings, the encounters often ended badly. The American aircraft didn't behave like a normal escort fighter. It didn't panic when isolated. It didn't rely on tight turns. It waited. It slowed down. And then it reversed the fight. What made the P-38 dangerous was not just its speed or firepower. It was the way experienced pilots learned to use its engines as weapons. 2 engines meant more than redundancy. It meant control. Pilots like Bong discovered that by adjusting throttle independently, they could force the aircraft into sudden directional changes that German pilots had never trained against. The Luftwaffe manuals taught pursuit, not ambush, from the hunted. German pilots were trained to attack bombers and escorts that ran. They were not trained to deal with a fighter that wanted to be chased. After the April 14th engagement, German radar controllers became more cautious. Orders changed. Lone P-38s were no longer dismissed as easy targets. Fighters were told to wait for better positioning, to coordinate more carefully, to avoid getting drawn into close-range vertical fights. But combat doesn't always follow orders. On August 28, 1943, another incident unfolded over southern France, near the Rhône Valley. Once again, a P-38 was flying alone after escorting bombers returning from a strike on aircraft factories. Once again, German fighters closed in with numerical advantage. This time, the American pilot was Captain Jack Ilfrey, a veteran of North Africa. He had already survived being shot down once and had escaped capture. Ilfrey knew exactly what the Germans expected him to do, and once again, he did the opposite. Ilfrey allowed the German fighters to close to within visual range. He held altitude. He held speed. He waited until they committed fully. Then he dropped suddenly, forcing 2 fighters to overshoot while climbing into the remaining pair. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. German radio logs from that day mention unexpected reversal and unusual manoeuvring by twin-engine enemy fighter. It was becoming a familiar phrase. By late 1943, the Luftwaffe was under enormous pressure. Fuel shortages were growing. Pilot training hours were shrinking. Experienced aces were being lost faster than they could be replaced. Against this backdrop, the psychological impact of aircraft like the P-38 mattered almost as much as raw numbers. When a pilot believes he has the advantage and suddenly loses it, hesitation follows. And hesitation in air combat is fatal. The Americans understood this well. US fighter doctrine evolved rapidly during this period. Early in the war, American pilots were trained conservatively. Stay with the bombers. Avoid unnecessary risks. But experience over Europe changed everything. Pilots like Bong, Ilfrey, and others showed that aggression, when paired with understanding of aircraft performance, could flip the odds even when outnumbered. The P-38 became a platform for this mindset. Its nose-mounted guns meant pilots didn't need to calculate convergence. Wherever the nose pointed, the fire went. Its range meant it could escort bombers deeper than most fighters, and its climb performance at altitude made it deadly above 20,000 feet, where German interceptors struggled more than expected. German pilots noticed another detail too. P-38 pilots often fired short bursts, controlled, calm. They didn't spray. They waited. This suggested confidence. Confidence was dangerous. On the German side, morale began to crack. Pilots started reporting sightings of P-38s even when none were present. Some broke off attacks early, unwilling to commit if they suspected a lightning nearby. Ground controllers grew frustrated, unable to force engagements on favourable terms. The phrase, "he's turning back on us," became shorthand for a nightmare scenario. A moment when pursuit became exposure, when the hunter suddenly realised he was inside a trap. By early 1944, Allied air superiority was growing rapidly. New fighters, like the P-51 Mustang, began to dominate escort missions. The P-38 shifted roles more often, including ground attack and reconnaissance. But its legacy in air combat had already been set. Pilots who survived encounters with P-38s remembered them. They remembered the way the aircraft seemed to hang in the air, then snap into motion. They remembered the shock of seeing a target reverse direction instead of fleeing. They remembered how quickly numbers stopped mattering. As for Richard Bong, his career would continue far beyond that April morning. He would go on to become the top-scoring American ace of the war, though most of his victories would come later in the Pacific. But the habits he formed over Europe stayed with him. Discipline, patience, understanding the machine. The fight where 6 German fighters were drawn in and dismantled never became a famous headline. No victory film was made about it, but it lived on in reports, in training lessons, and in quiet warnings passed between pilots. It showed that technology alone does not win battles. Understanding does. A fighter is only dangerous when its pilot knows exactly what it can do, and more importantly, what the enemy thinks it cannot do. High above Europe, thousands of fights blurred together during the war. But some moments stood out. Moments when expectation collapsed, when training failed, when a single decision rewrote the outcome. This was one of those moments. A lone P-38, low on fuel, far from home. 6 fighters closing in with confidence. A decision not to run. A sudden reversal. And a sky that fell silent. In war, fear spreads faster than bullets. And on that day, fear travelled through German radio waves faster than any aircraft could fly. Because somewhere in that clear blue sky, the hunted had turned back. And the hunters never forgot it.